I knew something was wrong the moment the screen froze. It was Monday morning. 7:14 a.m. The sky outside my kitchen window was the color of cold oatmeal, flat and pale. I just poured my first cup of coffee, the kind I only ever make for myself now. 2 scoops of hazelnut blend, splash of half and half, 1 teaspoon of sugar, not stirred all the way through. I was still in my nightgown, hair twisted up with one of those old tortoiseshell clips, half listening to the weather on the radio. Rain was coming in from the west. The announcer said it like a warning. I opened my laptop to check the bank. I do it every Monday. Always have, even back when George was alive. Routine keeps the world from unraveling, I guess. But this time, something was off. There was a new charge at the top of the list. Then another. Then dozens more. My eyes blurred before I even hit scroll. Jewelry. Designer names. Spa packages. Airline tickets. All in one day. Tiffany. Cartier. The Ritz. Some luxury spa I'd never heard of in Beverly Hills. I froze. I genuinely, physically froze. My hand gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. The coffee steamed softly beside me. The only sound in the room, aside from the ticking of the old wall clock George insisted we keep even when the hands started sticking. $53,621.14. In one day. I read the number 3 times, thinking it would change. It didn't. My mouth went dry. My heart pounded slow but hard, like it had to push against something. There was no mistake. It was my card. The account ending in 5027. The one I kept tucked inside the zipper pocket of my purse. The purse that hadn't left my side all weekend. Had it? I was still staring when my phone buzzed on the table. It lit up with a message from Lauren. Lauren. My daughter-in-law. I hadn't even heard from her in over a week. The message was short. Love the gifts, Elaine. You're the best mother-in-law a girl could ask for. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I read it again. Slowly. Word by word. Until the words stopped being words and just became a feeling. Something tight. Something cruel. She'd used an emoji. 3, actually. Champagne. Diamonds. Sparkles. There was no apology. No question. Just an assumption. That I would take it. That I was too polite, too weak, too desperate to keep peace to ever push back. She hadn't just stolen from me. She was showing off about it. The next message came in before I could even process the first. Ty and I are having such a blast in Paris. The suite is insane. Wait till you see the view. Attached were photos. Her, standing on a balcony overlooking the Seine. Hair curled like she'd just stepped out of a salon. A flute of champagne in one hand. On her wrist, a diamond bracelet I didn't recognize, catching the morning light like a dare. Another photo. Her laying on a hotel bed, wrapped in a silk robe. The kind with the logo stitched in gold. I closed the message app and set the phone down like it might burn me. The kitchen felt too still. The air too thin. The house, my house, suddenly too quiet in the worst kind of way. 3 years ago, I'd buried my husband in a navy blue suit he'd saved for weddings and funerals. Since then, it's been just me. Me and this house, and the hydrangeas George planted before he got sick. Me and the routines. The Monday coffee. The Saturday morning laundry. The crossword on Sunday afternoons. And now this. $53,000. Stolen. Mocked. I walked to the sink and splashed water on my face, not because I needed to, but because I didn't know what else to do. I tried to think. When did she take it? When did she even have the chance? Sunday. They'd come over for dinner. Lauren had insisted on helping with dishes. She'd hugged me goodbye with both arms, pressing her body too close. I'd thought she was being warm for once. Thought we were maybe turning a corner. But now that hug felt like something else. I reached for my purse. The card was gone. Not the whole wallet. Just that one card. Deliberate. She knew exactly what she was doing. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach turn, was that I'd been so happy she was finally talking to me. Smiling at me. I'd spent 3 years trying to win her over. Complimented her outfits. Laughed at her sarcastic jokes. Let her rearrange my living room for better flow. Even agreed with her when she told my son I was starting to repeat myself. And now? Now she was celebrating in Paris with my money and sending me photos like some kind of twisted thank you card. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, still barefoot, still holding onto the table edge. I wanted to scream. Or cry. Or throw something. Instead, I picked up the phone again. I reread her message one more time. Every emoji. Every condescending syllable. Then I opened my banking app and stared at the transactions again. Each one a slap. A choice. A theft dressed in sequins and filtered light. And I realized. This wasn't just about money. It was about being seen as disposable. I closed the app and sat down slowly in the same chair where George used to read the paper and shake his head at the world. I didn't cry. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I've heard people say that exclusion doesn't hurt as much as outright cruelty. They're wrong. Being cut out slowly, quietly, politely, it bruises differently. Deeper. You question if it's even happening. You gaslight yourself before anyone else can. Lauren married my son 3 years ago. And somewhere between the champagne toast and the cake cutting, I stopped being seen. It started small. So small, I could excuse it. Wanted to excuse it. At their wedding, I wasn't seated at the family table. I'll never forget standing in heels I hadn't worn in years, holding my little place card and looking for my name. When I finally found it, it was tucked at a side table with some of George's cousins we hadn't seen since '97. Luke told me it was just a mix-up. Lauren had been so stressed with the seating chart. I nodded and smiled. I said, of course, these things happen. But something in me tightened. The first Christmas, I knit her a scarf. Pale lavender. Cashmere. I spent weeks on it, squinting in the low light of the living room, counting stitches while reruns played on the TV. I wrapped it carefully. Tissue paper. Satin ribbon. She opened it in front of everyone. Held it up. Said, "How thoughtful. I'm sure someone will love this." Then she folded it once and never touched it again. Weeks later, I saw it hanging in their hallway closet. Still folded. Still tagged. A donation bag with a Goodwill receipt tucked beside it. That one stung. But I kept trying. I thought maybe I wasn't being warm enough. Maybe she just needed time. So I complimented her cooking. Even when the pasta was underdone. I let her rearrange my living room. For better energy, she'd said, moving George's favorite chair from the window. I started changing small things. Quiet things. I stopped talking about my husband. Stopped telling stories from when Luke was little. Because every time I did, Lauren would glance at her phone. Or whisper something to Luke when she thought I wasn't looking. One time, she rolled her eyes. I saw it reflected in the glass of the china cabinet. There was the birthday dinner where she called my meatloaf adorably retro. The brunch where she suggested I switch to pre-cut fruit, so I wouldn't strain myself. The way she'd talk loudly around me, like I was hard of hearing. The way she'd repeat things twice, slowly. I laughed it off. I always laughed it off. Because I didn't want to lose Luke. He was my only child. My baby. The boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and curl against me like a comma. After George died, it was just the two of us. Luke had held my hand at the funeral, whispered that I'd never be alone. I believed him. So I bit my tongue when Lauren joked about how I never upgraded anything. When she said my couch smelled like 1992. When she told friends, within earshot, that I still used a landline. She once joked that I was stuck in a sepia-toned life. She laughed when she said it. So did Luke. But I didn't. I never really laughed again, not when they were in the room. The worst part? I started believing her. I started to wonder if maybe I was a little outdated. Maybe it was good that Luke had someone modern, someone who pushed him forward. I told myself that love looks different now. That the world was faster, sharper. That maybe I was the one who needed to catch up. So I updated my phone. Learned how to use Instagram. Bought a smart speaker, which I hated, but smiled about. All because I wanted her to like me. Wanted him to see me the way he used to. But it never worked. Family photos would appear online. Always of the two of them. Always smiling. Brunches, holidays, trips. If I was in the background, I was cropped. If I was in the frame, it never made the post. Lauren always had an excuse. It was just a candid. We'll take a full group one later. You blinked in that one. Later never came. The timeline of those pictures became a diary of my slow erasure. And still, I stayed quiet. Because if I said something, I'd sound bitter. Old. Jealous. And God forbid a woman my age show any emotion other than gratitude. I used to wonder if I was imagining it. Maybe she didn't mean it that way. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe grief had made me fragile. But then I'd remember the little things. Like the time she reorganized my spice rack, saying it gave her anxiety. How she put the cinnamon next to the cumin and called it aesthetic balance. Or when she unplugged my coffee maker and replaced it with an espresso machine I never asked for. Then joked that real kitchens don't use drip anymore. She was always smiling. Always sweet. But her sweetness was like citrus in a paper cut. It stung in places you didn't know were open. Now, sitting in the same kitchen where all of this unfolded, my feet cold against the linoleum, I let the memories roll in like tidewater. One after another. The parties I wasn't invited to. The family group chat I was added to, then muted in. The time she told me that Luke's childhood stories were too personal to share with her friends. I thought I was just being generous. Letting the new woman in. Letting go of control. But now I wonder. Was I giving space? Or was I giving away everything? I stared at the photos again, the ones from Paris. Lauren holding that champagne glass like a trophy. Wearing that bracelet I now knew I'd paid for. I should have been angry. But mostly, I felt hollow. Because after all the dinners, the scarves, the bending over backwards, she never saw me as family. And now I have to ask myself, did Luke? Because maybe, the new family I kept telling myself I was part of, never really had a seat for me. The call came just before noon. I was in the laundry room, folding a load of towels still warm from the dryer. The scent of fabric softener clung to the air, lavender and something faintly chemical. I'd left the back door open to let the breeze in, and somewhere outside, a neighbor's wind chimes clinked with no rhythm, just random high-pitched notes cutting through the quiet. When I saw Luke's name flash on the screen, my heart stuttered. It had been 2 days since I saw the bank statement. 28 hours since Lauren's message. I hadn't told him yet. Part of me was still clinging to the hope that maybe, somehow, he didn't know. That it was all her doing. That he'd be horrified. Furious. That he'd book the next flight home and walk through my front door with the same fire he had when bullies teased me in middle school. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "You two settling in okay?" There was a pause. A long one. Then Luke exhaled, and I heard something in his voice that made my knees weaken just slightly. "Look, Mom. I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest." I straightened up. My mouth went dry. "Of course," I said. "What is it?" He cleared his throat. "Lauren told me you gave her permission to use your credit card for this trip. She said you wanted it to be a surprise gift for our anniversary." I blinked. My grip tightened on the phone. A slow, hot pressure crept up my chest. "She said you insisted," he added. "Said you were excited about treating us, but now you were maybe having second thoughts about the amount." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The sheer gall of it. The way she turned the story around, flipping my silence into complicity. I felt my voice get thin. "Luke. I never gave her permission to use my card. I didn't even know it was missing until 2 days ago." He didn't answer right away. In that moment of quiet, I could almost see him, wherever he was in Paris. Standing in a hotel hallway maybe, or outside a cafe, phone pressed to his ear, eyes flicking to his wife and back to the ground. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted. "Mom, come on. Lauren showed me the messages. You texted her about the card. Told her to enjoy herself. Said you wanted to surprise me." I leaned against the dryer to steady myself. "What messages?" I asked, voice low. "The ones you sent last week. Maybe you forgot. You've been under a lot of stress, and, well, Dr. Kim did mention how grief can affect memory sometimes." There it was. The knife. Sharp, quiet, dressed in concern. Grief can affect memory. Had they really been talking to my doctor? I remembered the last time I saw Dr. Kim. My blood pressure had been up. She said it was normal after loss. She'd patted my hand and said I was doing great, all things considered. But apparently, somewhere in the background, a different conversation had started. One I hadn't been invited to. I kept my voice steady. I remember perfectly well what I've said and done. And I never told Lauren she could use that card. Someone took it without my knowledge. That's not confusion, Luke. That's theft. Another pause. Longer this time. I heard the wind pick up outside. The wind chimes shifted again, more frantic now. I suddenly hated the sound. "Look, let's just talk about this when we get back," he said finally. I don't want to ruin our trip over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. My voice cracked. Just slightly. $53,000 is not a misunderstanding. There was a pause on the other end. Luke's voice came back soft, cautious. Wait. 53? Mom, that's not. Lauren said it was just a few thousand. Hotel stuff. A couple souvenirs. I walked to the window, stared out at the backyard. The hydrangeas were blooming. Pale blue. George had planted them the same year Luke turned 10. We took pictures beside them that summer. His front teeth missing. My hair still dark. I felt so far away from that life now. Check her luggage when you get back, I said quietly. Check her jewelry box. Then ask yourself if a few $1,000s could have bought what she's been wearing in those photos she's posting. I hung up before he could answer. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. The quiet that followed was different this time. Not the soft, comforting stillness of an empty house. It was a vacuum. The kind that pulls the air from your chest and leaves you aching. I thought about how I'd always tried to be easy to love. Low maintenance. Undemanding. How I'd held my tongue more times than I could count. And now I was being painted as forgetful. Fragile. Confused. Not because I was. But because it made me easier to silence. Outside, the wind finally died down. The chimes stopped. Inside, everything felt still again. Only now, I wasn't sure stillness was peace. I held the phone in my lap, staring at the black screen. My son had heard my voice, listened to my words. And still, his faith tilted toward her. My son believed his wife. Not me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the refrigerator hum through the walls, the faint creak of the water heater clicking to life under the floorboards. The house made familiar sounds, quiet, steady, old bones shifting in the dark. Nothing unusual. And yet, I felt like I was inside a stranger's home. Or maybe, worse, that the stranger was me. I stared at the ceiling for what must have been an hour before I gave up and padded into the kitchen. I didn't turn the lights on. Just the under-cabinet glow strips Luke had installed for me last Christmas. I boiled water and made a cup of chamomile tea. The kind that smells like honey and soil. I held it in both hands, just breathing. And then the question came. What if I had said something and forgot? What if Lauren was right? The thought slithered in like a leak under the door. I didn't want to believe it. But once it was there, it sat with me. Smug. Patient. I took a notebook from the drawer. The one I use for grocery lists and weekend reminders. I flipped back through the last month. There were no notes about the trip. No mention of a gift. No scribbled plans to surprise anyone. Still, the doubt lingered. And it wasn't new. It had been showing up for a while now, just in quieter ways. I remembered the restaurant. That evening in March. We were celebrating Luke's promotion. Lauren had offered to reorganize my purse while I was in the restroom. She said it looked chaotic. I'd smiled, said sure, thank you, not really thinking. When I got home that night, my keys were in the wrong pocket. My grocery list had vanished. My bank card was tucked behind a receipt from a dry cleaner I'd never used. I told myself maybe I'd done it myself. Then there was the grocery store incident. I'd asked her if she remembered if we already had garlic at home. She repeated, loudly, "You asked that 3 minutes ago." 2 other shoppers turned to look. One of them smiled at me. Pity. I felt it like a slap. I remember standing there, holding a bag of onions, feeling like a child who'd misbehaved. Maybe I had asked it twice. Maybe I hadn't. But her voice, too loud, too sweet, made it clear to everyone around us that she was the one keeping me in check. There were more moments. Tiny things. Like how she always offered to fill my pill organizer, just to be helpful. How she insisted I should use voice memos instead of writing reminders because it's easier for people your age. Once, at brunch with her friends, she leaned over and said, "It's so great Elaine still drives herself everywhere." Like I was 90. Like it was some small miracle I hadn't crashed into a postbox on the way. And I laughed. I always laughed. Because the alternative felt too dramatic. Too sensitive. Too unstable. God forbid a woman near 60 speaks up without being labeled difficult. The worst was when I talked about Harold. The first year after he died, I couldn't stop talking about him. I missed the sound of his voice. His laugh. The way he always knew when to say nothing. I used to tell stories, little ones, nothing dramatic. The way he used to dance in the kitchen when the baseball team won. How he oversalted everything but still pretended to taste subtle flavors. The first time I told one at dinner, Lauren glanced at her phone mid-sentence. The second time, she smiled and said, "That's sweet, Elaine." But Luke's heard that one a few times now. I went silent after that. Somewhere along the way, I stopped saying his name out loud. Even in my own home. And now, standing barefoot in my kitchen, tea cooling in my hands, I saw it all at once. Every comment. Every interruption. Every smile that never reached her eyes. I hadn't been imagining it. I'd been absorbing it. Letting her shape the version of me that the world saw. Bit by bit. Not crazy. Just declining. Not excluded. Just tired. Not stolen from. Just forgetful. I looked down at my tea. The steam had vanished. The liquid had gone flat. Lukewarm. I dumped it in the sink. Walked to my bedroom. Opened the closet. And there, behind my coat, was my old planner. The one I used before Lauren bought me the smart system. Thick with pages. Color-coded tabs. My handwriting messy but legible. I flipped through. I'd written everything down. When George got sick. When the card was activated. When Lauren and Luke came for Sunday dinner. I ran my fingers over the page from last week. It was blank. But not because I'd forgotten. Because nothing happened. Nothing I needed to record. Nothing that sounded like, surprise, here's a trip to Paris. I sat down on the floor with the planner in my lap. The wind picked up outside. The branches scratched lightly against the windows. And something tightened in my chest. I hadn't lost my mind. I hadn't forgotten. But someone wanted me to think I had. Maybe I'd been manipulated longer than I ever realized. It started with the pasta. I couldn't eat it. I'd made a simple dish, something George used to love. Bow-tie noodles, roasted cherry tomatoes, garlic, a touch of lemon. I plated it carefully, sprinkled Parmesan on top, even poured a glass of red to go with it. Then I sat down, took one bite, and realized my stomach had closed up like a fist. I stared at the food for a long time, then carried the plate to the sink and dumped it, the noodles sliding down in slow motion. The scent of garlic clung to the air long after I turned on the fan. I felt sick. But not from the food. From something deeper. Older. I turned off the stove and walked straight to my desk in the back room. It's where I kept the important things. Tax records. Insurance files. Notebooks. Passwords. And bank statements. I logged into my accounts and pulled up the records from the past 3 months. Not just the joint account. Not the personal credit card Lauren had used for the Paris trip. I wanted to check everything. I'd always prided myself on being thorough. George used to tease me about it. Said I could out-audit the IRS if they ever came knocking. Now I scrolled. And scrolled. And froze. A charge on March 15th. Le Jardin, a restaurant downtown. $826. I hadn't been to a restaurant that week. I hadn't left the house. Another charge a week later. A spa in Santa Monica. $1,290. I'd never even heard of the place. April. Nordstrom. $2,600. May. A boutique in Beverly Hills. June. A weekend at the Fairmont. And that was just the start. At first, I thought maybe it was my personal card, the one I use for groceries, Amazon, the occasional birthday present. But the numbers didn't match. So I opened the file drawer. Found the small blue folder labeled Business, Whitmore and Associates. My fingers hesitated over the plastic before opening it. Inside was the information for the corporate credit account George and I used to run our consulting firm. I hadn't touched that card in years. Not since we downsized and let the staff go. Not since George died. The company was technically still open, though inactive. I hadn't closed it. I told myself it was sentimental. Something we built together. Something that felt like his, too. The card had remained tucked in the bottom drawer. Just in case. Still active. Still carrying the business name. Still legally protected. And now I knew. Lauren hadn't just stolen. She had used the wrong card. The corporate card. The one tied to a federal EIN, not just my personal social. I pulled out a notebook and started copying the charges by hand. One by one. I read each merchant name like a confession. Dates. Amounts. Descriptions. She didn't just slip once. She'd been building toward this. Testing boundaries. Spending more. Seeing how far she could go without being noticed. 8 months of quiet theft. And I hadn't seen it. Because I'd been too busy trying to be soft. Forgiving. Tolerant. I thought about all the times she'd sat in this kitchen, legs crossed, sipping wine from my glasses, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Wearing clothes I now recognized from the receipts in front of me. She'd looked me in the eyes. She'd hugged me goodbye. She'd called me generous. And all along, she'd been using the business George and I had built to pay for her life. Her spa days. Her jewelry. Her plane tickets. I remembered something George once told me. We were negotiating a contract with a supplier who'd tried to bury a clause deep in the fine print. George caught it. Always had a nose for deception. People always reveal themselves, he said. The trick is watching what they do when they think you're not looking. Lauren must have thought I wasn't looking. That I couldn't. That I wouldn't. I looked at the total I'd calculated. $74,319. And climbing. I sat back in my chair. The leather cracked slightly beneath me. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the floor. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. This wasn't petty theft. This wasn't family drama. This was federal fraud. Because that card didn't belong to me, not entirely. It belonged to the company. And the company still existed. Which meant audits, tax reports, legal exposure. And now, a digital trail of unauthorized luxury labeled as client meals and vendor gifts. I stood up and walked to the hall closet. Reached in. Pulled out the navy blue suit I hadn't worn in years. George gave it to me on our 10th anniversary as business partners. Said I looked like a woman no one would ever dare underestimate. It still fit. I held it in the low light of the hallway. Smoothed the lapel with my fingers. The fabric still had that faint scent of dry cleaning fluid and confidence. Maybe I'd been quiet too long. Maybe I'd let her think I was just some harmless old widow, sitting in her kitchen with a crossword puzzle and a soft smile. But she'd made a mistake. She'd made the wrong move. She thought I was just a grieving woman with a slow mind and a soft heart. She was wrong. I hadn't worn that suit in almost 4 years. It was tucked in the back of my closet, behind the cardigans and windbreakers, still draped in a dry cleaning bag. Navy wool, smooth to the touch, with soft shoulder padding and mother-of-pearl buttons. George had given it to me on the 10th anniversary of Whitmore and Associates. You wear this, he said, and they'll never mistake who's in charge. I slid the plastic off and ran my fingers down the sleeves. A few threads were loose near the cuff. I smoothed them with my thumb. Then I took a deep breath, stepped into the bathroom, and dressed with a kind of precision I hadn't felt in years. I curled my hair the way I used to for client meetings. A soft wave, pinned behind one ear. Light makeup. Lipstick a little too red for grocery errands, but just right for business. When I looked in the mirror, something shifted. Not in my face. In my spine. There she was. The woman who used to close contracts over breakfast. Who negotiated with suppliers twice her size and never blinked. Who once sat across from a lawyer trying to sue our firm and made him apologize before dessert. I packed my tote with a notebook, copies of the credit card charges, and one of George's old pens, black lacquer, gold trim. Then I locked the house and drove downtown. It was early still. Just past 8:30. The streets weren't crowded yet. The sun hadn't burned through the morning haze. A few cafes were opening their doors, the scent of espresso drifting into the sidewalks. When I pulled into the parking garage beneath the old Whitmore building, I hesitated for half a second. The last time I'd been here, the receptionist had brought me flowers. For your loss, she'd said, her voice cracking. I'd smiled politely, signed some papers, and walked out with my name still on the door but a crater where my partner used to sit. But now, as I rode the elevator up to the 12th floor, something else filled that space. Resolve. The doors slid open with a quiet chime. And there it was. The glass logo on the wall. The reception desk with the soft gray leather chairs. The bowl of wrapped mints nobody ever really liked but everyone took anyway. Maria was still there. She looked up from her screen and blinked. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her tone both surprised and cautious. I didn't expect. Good morning, Maria. I need to speak with Jennifer Morrison. Is she in? Yes, I'll page her right away. I nodded and turned toward the conference room, my heels clicking on the polished floors. The room hadn't changed. The long mahogany table. The tall-backed chairs. The glass whiteboard that still had faint outlines from a marketing brainstorm 2 years ago. I sat at the head of the table. George's chair. Jennifer entered 5 minutes later. She looked exactly the same, sleek blonde bun, pearl earrings, a face that revealed nothing unless she chose to. "Agatha," she said. "It's good to see you." I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Jennifer. I need to review all recent charges made on the company card. Especially those tied to the user profile under Luke Whitmore." Her face didn't move. "Of course. May I ask?" "You may not." "Not yet." She blinked, nodded once, and left to retrieve the records. While I waited, I looked around the room. This place had been my life once. Not just work. George and I built it from a 2-desk operation in a rented attic to a consulting firm that had real weight in the city. And now, without me even realizing, someone had been using him, to fund a parade of spa visits and diamond-studded brunches. Jennifer returned with a thick folder and her laptop. She sat across from me, opened her files, and turned the screen so I could see. "These are all the charges from the past year under Luke's account." I leaned in. And time stopped. There were charges I hadn't even seen in my personal records. $3,200 at a boutique in Milan. $5,400 coded as client meals at a wine bar in West Hollywood. $9,100 at a wellness retreat in Sedona, Arizona. Jennifer began scrolling faster. "None of these were pre-approved," I said, my voice like ice. "These were never discussed." "No," she said quietly. "I assumed they were part of some arrangement." "And the card, Jennifer, the card is still in my name. George and I are the legal owners. Luke was only ever listed as an authorized user for winding down expenses. Office cleaning. File storage. Final taxes." She nodded. I kept watching the numbers stack up. The arrogance of it. The pattern. Each charge a middle finger dressed in silk. And then I saw it. A photo Lauren had posted 3 weeks ago. Her in a 5-star hotel, wearing a red dress, holding a champagne glass. That same day, the card showed a $1,750 charge to European Hospitality Group, Suite Upgrade. The next line said, simply, Client Appreciation Dinner, $2,800. I almost laughed. Jennifer looked at me carefully. "Agatha. This isn't just a misuse of funds. If the documentation is false and the purchases are personal, this qualifies as corporate fraud." I nodded. My jaw was tight. "And the implications?" "IRS investigation. Possible criminal charges. Fines. Jail time. Reputation damage. Especially if it looks like the company facilitated the activity." I took a deep breath and leaned back. "Jennifer," I said, "thank you. I'll need digital copies of everything. And starting today, freeze that card. No further charges." She opened her mouth to speak. "Thought better of it." Nodded. As she left, I remained in the conference room alone. I looked down at my suit. Ran my hand over the table where George once sat across from me, smiling at a job well done. I wasn't here to cry. I was here to fight. I wasn't just a mother-in-law anymore. I was the executive. And I was back. I used the spare key Luke gave me 2 years ago. He'd handed it over casually one Sunday afternoon, said something about, in case of emergencies, while Lauren smiled tight beside him. I'd tucked it into a little velvet pouch in my top drawer and never touched it again. Until now. They were still in Paris. probably still sipping champagne on balconies I'd unknowingly paid for. I wasn't there to snoop. Not anymore. I already had what I needed. Documents. Transactions. Proof. I just wanted to understand. I parked down the street, walked up the stone path lined with trimmed hedges Lauren had probably hired someone to maintain. The house was quiet. Still. The kind of silence that only happens when a place is untouched for days. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lavender and expensive candles. The kind sold in heavy glass jars with French names and no price tags. I slipped off my shoes out of habit and stepped into the kitchen. White quartz countertops. Chrome fixtures. A row of curated cookbooks, neither of them used. A fruit bowl with plastic grapes arranged just so. Even the chaos in their life was staged. I moved slowly. No rush. The living room was pristine. Not a single photo of family. No messy corners. No warmth. Just art on the walls that matched the rug. I walked past the dining room into the hallway, toward the bedroom. The door creaked softly when I opened it. The bed was made perfectly. A stack of designer pillows like a showroom display. On the nightstand, a half-full water bottle, a book about coastal architecture, and a charger coiled neatly. I didn't need to search. I knew where to go. I opened the closet. Shoes lined up like soldiers. Dresses hung on velvet hangers, arranged by color. At the bottom, behind a box labeled Holiday Decor, I found it. A black leather file folder. Zip closed. Ordinary. Professional. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The first few pages were innocent enough. Property records. Printouts of my home's estimated value. Scans of my utility bills. Copies of insurance statements. Then it got worse. There were internet searches. Power of attorney process. Signs of early dementia. How to gain financial access for elderly relatives. Each printed and highlighted. Then a handwritten checklist, each bullet neat and measured. Establish confusion pattern. Document memory lapses. Suggest financial advisor. Have Luke added to accounts, summer. Power of attorney by Christmas. Full control within 18 months. I stared at the last line until the words stopped meaning anything. Full control. Within 18 months. The handwriting was unmistakably Lauren's. I'd seen it on thank you cards. Grocery lists. Passive-aggressive notes on the fridge about leftovers. But this wasn't a reminder to buy oat milk. This was a strategy. A campaign. A takedown. I flipped through more pages. Photos of my backyard from different angles. Notes about which medications I'd mentioned during dinner conversations. Even the brand of wine I preferred. What I spent on groceries. Where I kept spare keys. She had mapped out my life. Like a project. Like a target. I sat very still for a moment. The kind of still that doesn't feel peaceful. Then I took out my phone and began taking pictures of every page. My hands were steady. My breathing calm. Almost mechanical. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about clarity. I'd spent years wondering why she disliked me. Why I always felt smaller in her presence. But now I knew. She hadn't disliked me. She had studied me. Researched me. Planned for me to fail. I zipped the folder shut and placed it exactly where I found it. Smoothed the bedspread. closed the closet. As I moved to leave the room, something caught my eye. A photo on the dresser. Luke and Lauren, arms around each other, smiling on a boat somewhere sunny. Lauren's hand rested lightly on his chest. And I felt it, sharp and deep, how much of him she'd already claimed. How much of him she had weaponized against me. In the hallway, I paused at the door to what used to be the guest room. It was now an office. Sleek desk. Big screen. Mood lighting. On the whiteboard above the desk, in blue marker, was a quote. Control the narrative, control the outcome. I didn't recognize the author. But I recognized the philosophy. It was all over my life. Back home, I poured a glass of water and sat in George's old chair. The evening light pooled on the floor like molasses. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked twice, then fell silent. I stared at the photos I'd taken. At the handwriting. The bullet points. The timeline. And a thought bloomed slowly in my chest. This hadn't been a mistake. This hadn't been greed. It was something darker. More deliberate. This wasn't a theft. It was a hunt. And I was the prey she had marked. I roasted the chicken the way he liked it. Garlic under the skin. Thyme from the backyard. A drizzle of lemon over the top, then basted every 30 minutes until the skin crisped, golden and crackling. Mashed potatoes whipped with real butter. Roasted carrots with honey glaze. The table set for 3. It was the meal I used to make when Luke came home from college. When he'd walk in with a duffel bag and that look in his eyes like he was tired of the world but finally safe again. Back then, he'd devour 2 servings without taking a breath. Tonight, I wasn't sure how much either of them would swallow. They arrived at 6:45, just like Lauren had texted that morning. Punctual, polite, still in sync with each other like a practiced dance. Lauren was dressed in red. The same shade she wore in the photo from Paris. A statement dress, bold and glossy. Her heels tapped against my floor like punctuation marks. She carried a small white purse and wore a smile so bright it almost dared me to flinch. "Elaine," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "It smells amazing in here. So cozy." Luke hugged me. Warm. Familiar. A little too quick. I asked how the trip was. Lauren launched into stories, sunrises on the Seine, the spa in Montmartre, a cheese shop that apparently changed her life. Luke smiled at all the right moments. But his eyes darted toward me more than once. I played the role. Quiet host. Gentle mother. I passed the serving dish, poured the wine, refilled water without being asked. No one mentioned the charges. Not yet. We sat down. They started eating. And then I stood. I walked to the sideboard, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder I'd spent 3 days assembling. Paper clipped. Numbered. Cross-referenced. I returned to the table and placed the folder right in front of Lauren. No announcement. No drama. She blinked. "What's this?" "A misunderstanding," I said, and took my seat again. She looked at me, then at Luke. Luke reached over and flipped the folder open. Page 1. March 15th. Restaurant charge. Noted location. Time. Receipt. Page 2. April 3rd. Spa invoice. Corporate card. Unauthorized. Page 3. A printout of her 18-month plan. Lauren didn't move. I continued eating. Luke flipped another page. His hands slowed. Eyes scanning. Shoulders tightening. Lauren smiled again, tighter now. Elaine, this is all. I think there's been some confusion. I set my fork down. Try saying that again, I said softly. She hesitated. I gestured to the folder. Say the word misunderstanding one more time. Luke looked up. His voice was low. What is this, Lauren? She straightened in her chair. It's nothing criminal. I thought your mom was okay with it. She gave me the card. Maybe not directly, but she never said. I never said because I never knew, I said. And now I do. She turned to Luke. Honey, you know how forgetful she's been lately. I leaned forward just slightly. Call me forgetful again. Luke looked between us. His eyes searching. Not sure where to land. Lauren's smile cracked then. Just slightly. A tremor at the corners. This is still your family, she said. We can talk this out. I handed her the last page. Total amount to date. $78,467.33. She stared at the number like it might vanish if she blinked enough. Luke didn't speak. I reached for my wine, took a sip, and let the silence stretch. Lauren finally folded the folder closed. Her hands were shaking now, but she tried to mask it by smoothing the linen napkin in her lap. What do you want, Elaine? I looked at her. Not a thing. I turned to Luke. Not even an apology. He swallowed hard. You planned all of this, he said to her quietly. Didn't you? She looked at him. Her mouth opened. No words came out. I sat back in my chair and took a breath. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't surprised. I was just done. The kitchen light hummed softly above us. Outside, the street lamp flickered to life. The smell of roasted garlic still lingered in the air, layered now with something quieter. Finality. Luke didn't touch his plate again. Lauren sat perfectly still, like she could rewind this moment with enough stillness. I watched them both. And I realized, with the weight of a stone sinking in water. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the ending of a chapter I'd kept alive too long. I looked at my son one last time. Really looked at him. His jaw, tight. His eyes, glassy. A man torn between loyalty and truth. And I wondered. Was he ever mine to begin with? Or had I just raised him to be given away? This wasn't a misunderstanding. Not even a theft. It was predation. And I was the prey she had chosen long ago. The next morning, I brewed coffee stronger than usual. I didn't need it for energy. I needed it for grounding. The bitterness. The heat. The simple ritual of it. The kitchen was quiet. Sunlight pushed through the blinds in thin gold lines across the tile floor. Outside, the mail truck hummed past. The world was moving like any other day. But everything had shifted. Last night's dinner still echoed in the air. The weight of silence. The tightening in Luke's jaw. The folder on the table like a final exam no one passed. I rinsed the mug. Dried it. Took a breath. Then I picked up my phone. The message was short. Direct. Polite. I need you both to come by at noon. No more food. Just the truth. At 11:58, their car pulled into the driveway. Lauren stepped out first. Still polished. Still poised. But there was a slight crack in her posture, a tightness around her eyes that wasn't there yesterday. Luke followed. Shoulders slumped. No tie. No jacket. Just jeans and a plain button-down. I didn't invite them to sit. I had already set everything on the kitchen counter. The signed documents. The notarized letters. A full financial breakdown. Lauren opened her mouth. I raised a hand. Let's skip the performance. She closed her lips. You have 2 days, I said. 48 hours. I walked them through it calmly. You will return the full amount to the business account. Every cent plus fees. You will sign this statement of forfeiture. Permanent separation from company assets, access, name. You will make no further contact with me or with any of my advisors. And you will walk away. Quietly. No drama. No stunts. If you refuse, or delay, I will file a federal complaint for corporate fraud. The evidence will go straight to the IRS and the police. You know what that means. Lauren didn't move. I turned to Luke. You have your own choice, I said. But hers is non-negotiable. For the first time, his eyes met mine. Fully. There was no anger in them. Just something softer. Older. Mom, he said quietly. I didn't know it had gone this far. I nodded. I believe that. But not knowing is not the same as not participating. Lauren stepped forward. You're threatening your own family over money? No, I said. I'm holding someone accountable for lying, stealing, and manipulating the person who loved you without reason. She crossed her arms. You want me to just vanish? I held her gaze. Yes. You want me out of his life? I shrugged. That's not up to me. But mine? Absolutely. She let out a sharp breath. And what if I say no? Then I smiled. A small one. Quiet. Clean. Then I'll stop being a mother and start being a business owner. And I promise, you'll wish it had stayed personal. The clock on the wall ticked. 1. 2. She looked at the papers again. Then at Luke. He didn't say a word. She walked to the counter, flipped through the document, and laughed once, short, bitter. I underestimated you. I didn't answer. She turned to Luke again. Waiting. But he kept his eyes on the floor. Elaine, he said finally. I'm sorry. I know, I said. I just wish I didn't have to fight this hard for you to see me again. Lauren picked up her purse. 48 hours? She asked. I nodded. She opened the door and walked out. Luke stayed behind. The silence stretched. He rubbed his hands together. Nervous. I should have asked more questions, he said. I should have seen it. I didn't respond. He looked around the kitchen. The same space he'd grown up in. His old handwriting still faint on the fridge where he once wrote his name in marker. I remember Dad used to say you could see the whole truth in the quiet, he said. I nodded again. You just have to listen long enough. He took a breath. What happens now? I gathered the folder and walked it back to the desk. When I returned, I looked him in the eyes. Now, I wait to see if you stand where she does, or if you remember where home really was. He didn't answer. Just nodded slowly, then left. The door clicked softly behind him. I returned to the sink. Washed the mug again. The warm water ran over my hands. This time, it felt steady. Outside, the neighbors' kids were chalking on the sidewalk. Blue lines. Yellow suns. Laughter floating up like wind. Inside, everything was still. Not because nothing hurt, but because I had chosen peace over pretending. And when I looked in the mirror above the stove, I saw someone I hadn't seen in years. Not a victim. Not a villain. Just me. I smiled. But not because I forgave. She left without a word. No screaming. No grand exit. Just a slammed car door and taillights shrinking down the street like the last flicker of a match. The house was so quiet after that, it didn't feel like silence. It felt like space. Luke stood in the hallway, still in the same clothes he wore to the meeting. His eyes were glassy, and his mouth opened and closed like he was rehearsing something he hadn't quite written yet. Then he walked toward me, slowly, like a boy again. And he cried. Not loud. Just quiet, heaving sobs into my shoulder. The same way he did the morning we buried his father. The same weight, the same helplessness, but this time, no casket. Just consequences. I held him like I used to. My hand on the back of his head, fingers brushing hair that was now more coarse, more tired. We stood like that for what felt like hours. And then we got to work. We started with the living room. The bookshelf first. He picked up the wedding frame, the one with Lauren in white, smiling wide, a little too wide, and looked at it for a long time. He didn't say anything. Just set it down beside a box marked donate. We moved on to the drawers. Birthday cards signed with fake warmth. A wine glass etched with "World's Best Daughter-in-Law." An apron she gave me that said, "Retired, not expired." I had laughed when I opened it. I didn't mean it. By sunset, 3 boxes sat by the door. 2 bags of trash. 1 small pile of papers I wanted to burn. We ordered takeout, no one had energy for cooking, and ate sitting cross-legged on the floor, like we used to during movie nights. Chicken lo mein for me. Sweet and sour pork for him. We didn't talk much. He just kept glancing at me like he was seeing me all over again. The next morning, he offered to stay a few days. Said I shouldn't be alone. I said no. He hesitated. I mean it, Luke. I'm fine. I didn't say it to push him away. I said it because it was true. I had been alone for 3 years. I just hadn't said it out loud. Not since George. Not since Lauren took his hand and began pulling him inch by inch into a new orbit. I'd been alone at Christmas dinners, surrounded by people. Alone during doctor appointments, while Luke called in late. Alone on the front porch with a second glass of wine, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. But now? Now it was just me. No games. No pretending. No trying to fit into a mold someone else designed for me. I kept the house. Kept the garden. I replanted the hydrangeas George loved, pulled out the dying tomato vines, and replaced the cushions on the porch swing. I made 1 cup of coffee every morning, the way I like it, black, hot, bitter enough to bite. I walked without checking my phone. I read without feeling guilty for resting. And I slept like the house had finally exhaled. Luke called every few days. Sometimes just to talk. Sometimes to sit in silence while we both folded laundry or made dinner. He was grieving something too. Not just a marriage, but a version of the truth he'd believed in. I never said I told you so. Mothers don't need to. One afternoon, he stopped by with a small box. Inside was the old Polaroid I'd forgotten we had. The one of me and George in the office, grinning like fools over our first client contract. I was in the navy suit. He had a mustard stain on his tie. We laughed for 10 minutes that day. Luke had found the photo in a folder Lauren had labeled junk. He handed it to me carefully, like it was glass. I taped it to the fridge. Not for nostalgia. For grounding. To remind myself who I had been. Who I still was. Some friends stopped calling after everything happened. Some didn't know what to say. That was fine. I wasn't interested in sympathy. Pity wears a polite face but keeps a measuring stick behind its back. People want widows to be soft. Forgiving. Quiet. They don't like it when we remember who we were before we buried a last name. But I remembered. I remembered everything. And I carried it now, not like a weight, but like armor. That spring, I threw out the guest towels Lauren had picked. Painted the hallway she always said was too beige. I even bought a new wine glass. Just one. And I filled it, not for company, but for me. I sat on the back steps, legs crossed, barefoot in the grass. The sun was warm on my face. No apologies. No explanations. No audience. Just me. And that was enough. I had lived alone for 3 years. The only difference now was I didn't have to pretend anymore. I moved on a Thursday. The kind of Thursday that forgets it's a weekday. No traffic. No rush. The sky soft with early spring, air cool enough to keep your cardigan on but warm enough to leave the windows open. The new apartment overlooked the harbor. A second-floor walk-up with creaky stairs and white shutters that caught the late afternoon sun like open arms. It wasn't big. But it was mine. The movers left the last box in the kitchen around noon. By 3 o'clock, I'd unpacked the teacups, hung the photo of George and me, just one this time, and lit a lavender candle near the sink. The light poured in through the west-facing windows, golden and slow. The floor was warm beneath my feet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to fill the silence. There was no echo in this house. Just space. Light. And the sound of me, breathing freely. Luke came by that weekend. He brought lunch from a little cafe near his new office and a bag of oranges he remembered I liked. His hair was longer. His face more tired. But his laugh, when it came, was real again. Not polished. Not performed. We sat at the kitchen table, both of us barefoot, plates between us, napkins unfolded but unused. He told me about the new job. The smaller firm. The lower pay. The relief. It's good, he said. Hard, but good. We clinked glasses, just water this time, and toasted to starting over. Later that evening, after he left, I stood by the window watching the boats drift into dock. The masts like matchsticks. The water glinting like old silver. There were no footsteps in the hallway. No one waiting for me to say the wrong thing. I was alone. But I wasn't lonely. That took me time to understand. I filled my days slowly. Signed up for a photography class at the community center. Bought a second-hand Nikon and spent mornings by the boardwalk, capturing birds mid-flight and old men playing chess in the park. I joined a book club full of women with short gray hair and strong opinions. We met on Thursdays and argued about characters like they were family members. I even started writing again. Little essays. Memories. Nothing big. Just moments I didn't want to lose. Some days I wore lipstick just for myself. Bright red, no one to impress. Some nights I cooked a full dinner and ate it at the table with a cloth napkin and a candle. I stopped apologizing for sleeping in. For laughing too loud. For saying no. And slowly, the version of me that had been shelved, the woman I was before the compromises, the soft swallowing of hurt, began to return. Not all at once. But piece by piece. Sometimes I'd think of Lauren. Of how much energy I'd once spent trying to make her like me. How I mistook her cruelty for coldness, her manipulation for ambition. I didn't hate her. I just no longer carried her weight. And Luke, he was rebuilding too. We had dinner every Sunday now. Not out of obligation, but out of rhythm. Habit born not from duty, but from want. We talked. We listened. We remembered things the same way again. Not as mother and son clawing for peace. But as two people learning how to live lighter. One Sunday he looked around my apartment and said, "This place suits you." I smiled. It does. That night, I sat by the window again. The boats rocked gently. The world moved without urgency. I picked up my camera and snapped a photo of the pier lit up against the sky. It wasn't a perfect picture. The frame was a little crooked. The focus soft. But I loved it. Because it was mine. Because it didn't need to be perfect to matter. I hung it on the fridge next to a grocery list and a magnet from Oregon. I made a cup of tea. Washed the dishes slowly, the warm water running over my hands. And I thought about all the roles I had carried in this life. Mother. Wife. Widow. Caretaker. Host. Outcast. Forgiver. Fighter. And now, just me. No one's mirror. No one's shadow. Just Elaine. And for the first time in a very long time. That was enough. I didn't tell this story for sympathy. Not for pity. Not for revenge. I told it because I needed to ask you something. But before I do, let me say this. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a woman my age was being alone. That once your children grew up, once your partner passed or your title disappeared from your signature line, you became invisible. Disposable. I thought being alone was the same as being abandoned. I know better now. I know what it really means to be alone. It's sitting at a dinner table surrounded by people who smile at you but never really see you. It's hugging your child and feeling like you have to apologize for existing in their life. It's hearing someone laugh at your expense and deciding, again, to stay quiet just to keep the peace. That's not alone. That's erasure. So no, this story isn't about a con artist daughter-in-law. It's not about stolen money or forged documents or power of attorney. It's about something quieter. Slower. It's about erosion. Of trust. Of voice. Of self. And it's about what happens when you finally reach the cliff edge and decide you won't step back anymore. I've built a new life now. No, it's not grand. There are no glittering parties or group vacations. There's just one apartment, one kettle, one camera. And me. But every piece of it is real. The morning light that hits my wall just right. The warmth of my tea as I sip it on the balcony. The sound of my own voice when I read out loud in book club and nobody interrupts. These aren't extravagant things. But they are mine. I don't wear my grief like a badge anymore. I don't chase anyone's approval. I don't sit at tables where I'm only welcome if I stay small. And that includes my own family. Luke and I, we're healing. It's slow. Uneven. Some Sundays we talk for hours. Some, we sit in silence. But it's ours. Not orchestrated. Not polite for politeness' sake. Just honest. Sometimes people ask if I miss the life I had before. I do. But not in the way they think. I miss the version of me that used to laugh without checking the room first. The one who wasn't afraid of asking questions. Of being too much. And slowly, I'm finding her again. She's not gone. She was just buried under years of being told to behave. To let things slide. To be the bigger person. Well, the bigger person still deserves to be seen. Now, let me ask you the question I promised. Let's say it was you. Let's say you were the one who opened that folder. Who found your face missing from family photos. Who stood at your own dinner table and watched the people you loved try to gaslight you into silence. What would you do? Would you swallow it? Would you shrink? Would you tell yourself, it's not worth the drama? Or would you do what I did? Would you stop asking for love that comes with conditions? Would you decide that peace is not the absence of conflict but the presence of truth? Would you finally say, enough? Because that's what I did. I chose to live a life where I don't beg to be treated with dignity. Where I don't mistake attention for affection. Where I don't sit across from liars and call it family. I'm not angry anymore. I'm awake. And I won't go back to sleep. So now, I pass the question to you. Because every one of us has our moment. Maybe it hasn't come yet. Maybe it's happening right now. Maybe it's quiet, subtle, a comment at dinner, a look that stings, a silence that grows. But when it comes, if it were you, would you keep enduring, or would you rise?